We are studying in Proverbs. I'm still in Ecclesiastes, if I can get this. See, I think it's chapter 13 is where we'll pick up. Oh, I didn't cast it, did I? There we go. All right, so we are looking at the section dealing with work, and as I mentioned, we've got we've looked at a subsection on diligence in work. This section dealing with laziness, and obviously those could kind of go together because they're, when you're talking, sometimes some of the verses even will mention, here's characteristic description of a lazy man, then over here the diligent man, or vice versa. But what we've separated them for our purposes here, and then of course we'll talk about honesty in our work, being dependable in work. Those are the last two subsections after this subsection on laziness. Then we'll get into talking about money and how we deal with money. And I think as I've looked at it, it's hard to know because I don't always know how far we'll get in a given class, but kind of looking back over our last few classes, I think we'll probably get pretty close to right at the end of next quarter, finishing that section on work. That's the next major section. And then that'll put us in position to do that last section after our summer series. So if I don't, I can condense it if I need to. If we start running out of time, I just don't know if we cover more ground and we get, I don't know, if I got a week or two left in the next quarter, do I want to jump into the section on relationships or save that? I don't know. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. My friend Brent would say that's a future Chad problem. We're just not going to worry about that right now. So, all right. So we're talking about laziness in work and looking at what the book of Proverbs has to say about that and how it teaches us not to be lazy, but to be diligent in our work. We looked last week at Proverbs 6 through 11, which deals with saying, go to the ant, sluggard, look at the ant. You want to learn a lesson on how to be diligent in work and avoiding laziness? Look at the ants. And, of course, we talked a lot about that. And then, as I said, we left off here in chapter 13. Yes, I was about to say I had one left in 12 that I was overlooking, but that's not. So 13 verse 4 is our next one here. The King James says it this way, the soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. Or the soul of the sluggard craves, and he gets nothing, the ESV says, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Sometimes you'll see this word in the King James used that is rendered fat. The soul of the diligent shall be made fat. It's the idea there of richly supplied, or how I was looking, see the New King James, soul of the diligent shall be made rich. So that's the idea, richly supplied or made rich. But here it's, again, the first passage in Proverbs dealing with laziness is in chapter 6, verses 6 through 11, which we looked at last week. Then you see it again in chapter 12. We can just back up here. It's just one chapter. Verses 24 and 27, where it talks about a prudent man the hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor. So again, you see the contrast there. And again, here's a passage where both diligence and laziness are mentioned together. And then verse 27, that same chapter 12, the lazy man does not roast what he took in hunting, but diligence is man's precious possession. And we talked about that verse last week. It's not there's some obscurity in the Hebrew there, but The idea there, the lazy man doesn't roast what he took in hunting. Seems to be saying he doesn't roast what he took in hunting because he's so lazy he doesn't go hunting. So obviously he doesn't have anything to roast, to cook, and eat for himself. So again, you see that verse in 6 through 11. You see it again in 12, 24, and 27. But the principle here is it's very simple. It's not complicated, but sometimes it's a struggle for us. But the principle there in chapter 13, verse 4, and really a lot of these verses, is if you want something, you're going to have to get out there and work for it. And, again, there are times when anybody, I don't care who we are, there are times we will need help. And it's a fool who thinks he can go through life pulling himself up by his own bootstraps, and I don't ever need anybody's help. I'm never going to take any help from anybody. That's a foolish way of thinking, and really the only person you're fooling is yourself if you think that. But at the same time, understand just constantly being handed something. It's the old adage of teaching a man to fish versus giving him a fish. You give him a fish, he eats for a day. You teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime. There's something to be said for getting out there and working for something to earn it. And there's, again, this is one of those we could probably go around the room, and so many people here could talk about even personal stories of, I wanted something, my parents didn't just give it to me. They said, well, you need to save up. You can start saving your money. You can do some extra chores, maybe for grandma or maybe for your parents, or maybe go get yourself a little part-time job or something and start saving up, and you can buy that. And there's something special about that. And it's a great life lesson. But that's the simple principle. If you want something, work for it. Don't just expect it to come to you. As one fellow said, wishful thinking will never replace hard work. Now, as I said, there are times we all need help. But there are also times when we all just need to get out there and work because we want something. And one of the verses we've looked at is even a lazy man, he'll get to work sometimes just if nothing else, but because he's hungry. So if you want something, get out there and work for it. Wishful thinking is not going to replace hard work. All right, next one is Proverbs 15. As always, if you got something to add, please do. If I get to moving too quick and you got something on one that I'm about to move on from, just shout out and we'll pause there. And 15, verse 19. The way of the slothful man is as an hedge of thorns, but the way of the righteous is made plain. Oh, sorry, I thought I was on the right verse, but I was not far enough down. The way of the lazy man is like a hedge of thorns, New King James says, but the way of the upright is a highway. So here it is again, this truth that is repeated in Proverbs time and time again, and probably nowhere more so as far as major sections. I don't know that we see it any more so than in this one, dealing with work. But what is that truth in Proverbs that's so often repeated? Does anybody remember this? I've mentioned it several times. We see it other places in Scripture, but it is just so many times in Proverbs. You reap what you sow. It's just over and over again. And you do see it in all of these major sections. I don't know that you see it any more so than in this one, dealing with work. But even with general wisdom, we saw it. But with speech, but what does he say? We noticed it in the sermon Sunday as well. Death and life, Proverbs 18:21, are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. In other words, you do well to watch your speech because you're going to reap what you sow. And if you sow grievous words, that was another one we looked at Sunday morning, 22:1. If you, not 22:1, 15:1. If you sow Is that right? I'm doubting myself. Yes, the soft answer. One of my kids said to me Sunday, I think it was Sunday morning, said, I really like that sermon, but you misquoted James. And so I said, yeah, I said James 1:5, and it was 1:16, and I guess I was thinking 15, and I couldn't remember if it was 15 or the one after, but I said 5, and I said, yeah, okay, you got me. And but it was a good sermon. I'm just pointing that out to you, not trying to be critical. And so now it's like every time I say a verse, I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I should double check that. But that was one of the verses that we talked about in the sermon Sunday morning as well, is Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer, use a soft answer. That's what you're sowing. What are you going to reap? Well, it tends to reap better relationships. Grievous words, you sow that, you tend to reap anger. They stir up anger or conflict. So the concept of reaping and sowing is all through Proverbs. We'll see it when it comes to money. We'll see it when it comes to relationships. And really, 15:1, talking about words, that kind of falls in with relationships as well. But it's over and over again in this book. And it's interesting to me because I never really paid attention to it that much studying Proverbs before. I mean, it's there and you know it's there. It's not like you just totally miss it, but maybe I just never had thought of it in terms of sowing and reaping. But man, I mean, it's just so many of these Proverbs illustrate that truth. But here you have a lazy man who his way is like a hedge of thorns. Let me say this first before I mention that. This again, something I learned new just this time around studying for this. There's some difficulty in the meaning here, and I don't know that it really affects the verse that much, but it is interesting because these two words, hedge and thorns, are only used twice in the Old Testament, the Hebrew words. And that's kind of key to the verse because there are the two obstacles. Those are the two obstacles for the lazy man, a hedge of thorns. They're only used twice in the Old Testament, so it's difficult to know exactly what they are. I'll just mention the word hedge is used again in Isaiah 5, verse 5. And God is speaking there about his vineyard that he had planted. It's an illustration, a metaphor for Israel. I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof. And he goes on and talks about other things that he's going to do, symbolic of punishment that's coming for the idolatrous northern kingdom. But he uses that word hedge. Those are the only two times that word is used in all Scripture. Same thing with thorns, except instead of Isaiah 5:5, the other use of it is Micah 7:4, talking about how wicked God's people had become. And Micah says, the best of them is as a briar. The most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. So there's your word for thorns. So it's a little bit of difficulty there with the Hebrew. But again, these are the two obstacles for the lazy man here. And I mentioned that first because I don't really think that necessarily affects the overall meaning here in the verse. That being, here you have a lazy man. He failed to do the job right the first time, is what it would seem to be indicative of. He fails to do the job right the first time, and so now he's going to find it even more difficult because he's got a way that has grown up into a hedge of thorns. By way of contrast, though, the way of the righteous man, because he worked hard, he didn't just shirk and shirk his responsibility the first time around or try to halfway do the job. His way is clear. A lot of times you see that, again, kind of a metaphor in Scripture of a way that is grown up versus a way that is open and clear, a way that is free from obstacles. And so there you see the difference. So this slothful man, it might be that he failed to do the job right the first time. And it might be, I don't mean to say that like that for sure because, the verse doesn't say, but it might be that he failed to do the job right the first time, taking shortcuts or whatever. It might be that he just failed to do the job the first time. because he's lazy, and I don't even see the point of that. Why would I bother with that? Well, now he's going to find out because it's going to be more difficult. Is it not true that there are some things that, yeah, you could take some shortcuts, but if it's going to lead to a lot more work down the road, and if you had done it right the first time, you actually would have ended up with less work. Sometimes that's the case. All right? Anything else on that one? I think Yeah, I think sometimes it means do what? I think sometimes it's the idea of somebody just they won't work, but sometimes you see, and it does seem like with here, well, of course, you got the word slothful. I don't have my. Well, actually, I think I can look at it here. What verse? 19. Sorry, keep getting off. I don't know if it's a different. I don't know if it's a different word that is used. Like here in the King James, it's got slothful, the way of the slothful man, sluggard in the ESV, and slothful here in the New King James. But I don't know if that's. I better not go down that rabbit hole because I could be. But I'll try to remember to look and see because I can look in my other Bible software. I'm a little bit quicker at navigating the interlinear and stuff in that one. But it might be a slightly different word. That's an interesting question, and I'm just not sure I know the answer right off the top of my head. But it might be that it's a slightly different word for somebody who doesn't do a good job. Maybe they are working, but they're not doing their best. So I don't know. I'm gonna. Who's got a pen? I'm all kinds of struggling here. I don't have my pen. I usually have a pen on me. So you said not working, not doing a good job. All right, I'm going to take a look at that sometime and see. Thank you, David. All right, yeah, I'll take a look at that and see, because that is an interesting question. Interesting thought. I never even thought about that. But we will find out. All right. Anything else on that one? Yeah, Blue Letter Bible will pronounce it for you, Bob. Bob found that out. I've learned that the hard way before too. I laugh sometimes because I think it's the Greek pronunciation. If you go on Blue Letter Bible and tell it to pronounce something in Greek, it literally to me sounds just like Dave Miller, who for years was the director of Apologetics Press. He still works with Apologetics Press. He's just not the director anymore. But, I mean, incredible. And he and I were laughing about that when he was here for our preacher workshop. I think it was the last workshop we had he was here for. And I was telling him about that. I said, have you been moonlighting as, like, pronouncing Greek words for this Blue Letter Bible app? He said, no, I don't think so. But we were laughing about that. So, yeah, well, I'll take a look at that and see. Anything else on that one? All right, Proverbs 18. But yeah, if you ever go into the interlinear on Blue Letter Bible, be careful, because if you hit that pronunciation button and your volume is up, he will start pronouncing it. But it's very, very helpful, especially some of those Hebrew words that are just, I don't even have a clue where to begin because not even letters that we're accustomed to seeing. All right, Proverbs 18. And see, here this kind of goes with Joni's question because Proverbs 18 verse 9 says, he also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster. So it'll be interesting to see, and that's what I'll try to do some research on. Is that the same word? It may be that Proverbs just uses them interchangeably. A lazy person, same word being used for somebody who he might be working, but he's doing shoddy work. He's not doing a good job. He's not doing his best. And so it might be that it's the same word. It might be that there's a slightly different word or a different nuance, like a cognate or something. But that's the idea here. He also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster. Whoever's slack in his work, ESV says, is brother or a brother to him who destroys. And that's an interesting verse because here the wise man is telling us, inspiration is telling us, that subpar work, not doing your best, is essentially the same as destroying something. We might not think of it that way sometimes, but that's, and I've had times in my life when I was basically told that by a parent or maybe a relative I was doing something for, and they say, hey, do it right or get out of here. You're not going to do it at all. So there's something to that. We understand that, I think, deep down, but that's an interesting thought that we often don't think of it that way. Not doing your best is, in many cases, tantamount to destroying. But a lazy person, he's always looking for a shortcut. He's always looking for a way out of work. And we're not talking here, by the way, getting more efficient to increase production. That's not the same as laziness. It's not the idea of, it's not to say that you can't try to find a better way to do something so that you can get more done or whatever. It's the idea of somebody who just doesn't want to work or they don't want to do their best. But they're always looking for a shortcut, a way out. And the end result is an inferior product here in this particular situation. But it's not just an inferior product. That's the thing. It's often something that is fraught with potential danger, either for that person or quite often for many people. I mean, can you imagine? You're an electrician, and you're paid to go in and wire up a house, but you're lazy. So you cut corners. You do lots of things not doing your best. Do you think there could be potential danger there for the residents of the house, whoever ends up buying that house, whoever ends up living in that house? It sure could be and would be, right? Sometimes it might be something like, well, they're going to have problems with shorts and things like that. It might not be anything huge, life-threatening, but it could be. What about somebody that works in auto repair, some kind of mechanic type work, and they're doing somebody's brakes, but they're lazy. They don't do a good job. Could that be life-threatening? So, we could go through all kind of scenarios and see that, yeah, that subpar work ends up being not just subpar work, but it ends up being a lot of times potentially dangerous. Billy said laziness is like smoke to the eyes, vinegar to the teeth. No one profits when a lazy person is involved. That's absolutely right. Which, of course, is another proverb, like smoke to the eyes, vinegar to the teeth. And I'm trying to remember where that is, Billy. I can't remember if we've covered that one yet or not. But yes, sir.
So my blue Sonata, I took to Thornton Road.
Mm-hmm.
To have an oil change, and I left, and on I-20, I see my engine light come on, and a little red oil-looking thing. I'm assuming those guys knew what they were doing, so I called them real quick, and they said, "Sir, we need you to return." So I returned, and these guys looked at it, and was 1 quart low in oil. Now,
something's not right there. It's amazing how many times that, you cut a corner or you're just being lazy in whatever way, and it ends up, again, not just an inferior product, but something that is dangerous. Maybe you've heard the illustration of the guy that, he was a carpenter, and he has a friend that contracts him to build this one last house before he retires, and so he's building this for his friend, but he's kind of got that, short timer's disease, as we sometimes call it. And he's wanting to, he's kind of wanting to be done and retire, but his friend has sort of begged him, like, hey, I want you to build this house for me. And so he cut a lot of corners, and when he gets done, the friend basically hands the key back to him and says, I was paying to have that house built for you as a gift, a retirement gift. It was a very wealthy friend, of course. And so, I don't know if that was a true story or not, but it certainly is a good illustration of how that can come back to you, come back on you yourself when you're cutting corners and being lazy and not doing your best. Anything else on that? Yes, sir.
I heard this on the news, but I'm checking it to make sure it's correct, and it is. China was building a gigantic submarine, and the work was so inferior, the thing broke apart and sank.
No kidding. Wow. There's an illustration of it. It's so often it comes back to bite you, but a lot of times it comes back to bite others when you're lazy, when you're cutting corners, and so on. All right, let's go into chapter 19. That's interesting. I was trying to think of, I had just the two examples of a car with faulty brakes or a house with bad wiring. I was trying to think of other examples, and so several people have supplied me with that, of some other good examples, because I thought those were two good examples, but I remember thinking to myself, working on my notes, I bet somebody else in class will have some other good examples, so I appreciate that. Chapter 19, verse 15. Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. An idle person will suffer hunger is the way the ESV puts that, and also the New King James. Well, once again, I'll mention this. The first warning against laziness there in chapter 6, 9 through 11, followed up by more warnings. Chapter 10, verse 4, 24 and 13. We're going to look at 24 and 13 in just a moment. I'll go ahead and go to 10:4 here just by way of reminder. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So again, there you have them both in the same verse, the contrast of diligence and laziness. But the one with the slack hand is going to become poor. The hand of the diligent makes rich. We'll notice, again, the ones from chapter 20 in just a moment. Let's say 15. One that we don't have in our list per se, but I'll mention it here because it is at least a similar thought, is 23:21. For the drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I've got that maybe in the section on money. The drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. So you can see where there's a similar thought here, not exactly the same. And this is interesting to me because he says, slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep. Well, the Bible does teach that the sleep of a laboring man is sweet. Remember we talked about that in our section on diligence. But the treasure oftentimes of a rich man won't suffer him to rest because he's so worried about his money. And we talked about that kind of in the context of Scrooge, of the Charles Dickens A Christmas Carol story. And so there is something to be said for, you work hard, you put in a hard day's work, and you go home and you sleep well, right? Because you're tired, you worked. It might also be that you've been really working hard, and sometimes we may stop and take a nap to refresh ourselves. That's not what this is talking about, though. This will be talking about, there's kind of become, y'all may know where I'm going with this, there's kind of, I don't know how long it's been around, but there's an expression that is used sometimes in the last, I've just heard it in the last few months, but I'm not exactly quick on the uptake when it comes to things in pop culture, but there's an expression that is often used. Does anybody know what I'm thinking of? People they're sleeping all the time, or the expression that I've heard is bed rotting. Y'all ever heard that? It's the idea of somebody, the kids will sometimes talk about also doom scrolling, where I'm just on my phone or my device and I'm not doing anything. All I'm doing is just scrolling. And a lot of times I've seen those used like together. I'm not seeing anybody that looks like they've heard this. Have I just dreamt this up? Did I just invent a new phrase? Hey, I'm telling you, I've heard that somewhere. I don't know. But everybody's looking at me like, I don't think so, Chad. Bed rotting is what I had heard. So if maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe there's something kind of similar to that. If so, just somebody see me after class or let me know, because I don't want to. That's what we need. We need some young folks up here so we can ask them, because they'll know if I'm getting it wrong or whatever. Alex is still looking at me blank, so I don't. You have heard it? Look at that. Okay, see? That tells me as I'm hip. I'm hip to all the new expressions. Yeah. All right, so at least I'm not crazy, At least I can say that. But anyway, it's not the sleep of, I'm tired. I've had I've worked really hard and I need the rest, and so I'm just sleeping to catch. No, this is just, and later on he's going to talk about as a door turns on its hinges, so is a lazy man. He's just back and forth in the bed. Why? Because he doesn't need rest. You don't need rest. You haven't done anything. So that's kind of the idea here. Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep. It's the kind of sleep where here's somebody that just numb to the fact that he's wasting so many opportunities, so much time. That's just a characteristic of laziness. So, it can be a problem where we have too little sleep, and that's not good for the body. But is it not also a fact that we can have too much? And Proverbs deals with that sometimes as well. All right, same chapter, verse 24. A slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. The ESV's got a slightly different rendering of this, as does the New King James here I'm seeing. So a lazy man or a sluggard buries his hand in the dish or in the bowl, will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. Well, here is it's a very graphic picture. It's meant to be exaggerative. It's exaggerating for the sake of emphasis, and that's the very definition of exaggeration or hyperbole. Hyperbole is defined as exaggeration for the sake of emphasis. But this is one of the more graphic pictures in Proverbs. It's exaggerated to the point of a lazy man. He puts his hand in the dish and goes, oh man, I'm just like I can't even manage to bring it back to my mouth to take a bite. Well, you can see where that's very over the top, very much exaggerated, but it's for the point of emphasis. It's also interesting to me, hadn't paid attention to this much until reading in Alden's commentary. He says, this is looking at the ESV, New King James rendering, by the way, because, he's got, will not even bring it, the sluggard buries his hand in the dish. But Alden says this, I just lost my place in my notes here. I was going to read this quote. The hand sinks deep into the common bowl. Why is that significant? The hand sinks deep into the common bowl. Because he's going to have to depend on everybody else because he's a bum. And so he's going, hey, can I get some of that? Can I get some of that? He's not sinking his hand into his own bowl, the one he's provided for himself, for his family. It's in the common bowl because he's going to be dependent on the state. He's going to be dependent on somebody else because he's a bum. He's lazy. That's an interesting thought, and certainly that applies to the sluggard. Anything else on that one? All right, yeah, let's go to, I got 2 in chapter 20. I think we can get these. Chapter 20, verse 4. The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg in harvest and have nothing. The lazy man will not plow because of winter. He will beg during harvest and have nothing. Or the sluggard does not plow in the autumn. He will seek at harvest and have nothing. Here it is again, that sowing and reaping in the context of work or lack thereof. But Alden notes in his little commentary that the time to plant in Palestine is in the rainy wintertime. And that is muddy, messy work. But if you don't do it, do you know what happens at reaping time? You're going hungry. You ain't getting that crop. And is it not the case with a lot of things that there are times on the front end where you have to do something that's not pleasant, it's not fun, but you get it done so that when the reaping time comes, you can do just that. You can reap instead of just reaping the wind. But here's the sluggard. He's not going to plow by reason of the cold, and so he's going to beg in harvest. I told y'all, what was that last week about Frank Chesser and giving me such a hard time, and my dad laughing with him about that ridiculous expression my dad used to say all the time about buying what you want and beg for what you need. And Frank loved that, and he all the time. And what's ironic is after I told that story, it popped up in one of the little Facebook memories. You have memories with so-and-so or whatever, and it was on something else, but Sister Chesser, Frank's wife, had commented on whatever this picture was or whatever that was in my Facebook memories. And she had commented on that. I made a comment back to her, and I put on there, either I did or she did, P.S. Don't ever forget, buy what you want, ... So, and of course, I knew Frank would get it. But that's, you see that concept a lot in Proverbs as well. We saw it just a moment ago where here's the guy's got his hand in the common dish. Why? Well, because he'll buy what he wants, and then when it comes time to fill his belly, you got to have food. You can't go without that. Oh, well, please help me. And sometimes, and I'm not, Joni mentioned it just a moment ago, and I'm not just trying to lump every single person in the same category because I don't know every single situation. I freely admit that. But probably more often than not, I think it's fair to say, here's somebody, they're on the side of the interstate or they're out near a restaurant or something, and I'm in need. Please help me out. Sometimes when I, several years ago, you don't see these as much anymore, or at least I don't. But it used to be all the time you would see in the sign would say, will work for food. I can't tell you how many people I ran across. I remember that a lot in my childhood, and I remember a lot of standing around just as a child hearing adults talking and hearing a lot of adults talk about, oh, you remember that guy over here on such and such drive? He's always over there with the will work for food sign? Yeah. I tried to offer him a job the other day. He didn't want it. The sign says we'll work for food. That's just what they put to get some sympathy, I guess. I don't see those as much anymore. Now they'll just say, in need, please help. And sometimes what it is, again, sadly, I think it's fair to say more often than not, maybe not every single time, but so often what it is somebody they're begging for what they need because they spent all their money buying what they want. And again, I'll tell you, I'm at least honest enough to say now that when my dad said that of me, it was pretty much true. I was not being the wisest with finances. All right, let's go to Proverbs 20:13, our last few minutes here, and we can stop there. He says, love not sleep, lest thou come to poverty. Open thine eyes, and thou shalt be satisfied with bread. Here's that idea again. We talked at length about sleep and not getting to the point of just sleeping so much that you're not working and you're being lazy. But open your eyes and you'll have plenty of bread. In other words, get your eyes open, get up, get out of bed, get to work, and you'll have plenty. Again, like chapter 19, verse 15, like chapter 20, verse 4, emphasizing two concepts here, laziness, but also going with that, the reaping what you sow. Laziness results in poverty, whereas hard work generally produces what we need, if not producing wealth. A lot of times hard work produces wealth, but we can say at the very least, typically it's going to produce what we need. Now, I put a note here in my notes to remember, I think it was last week we mentioned this, Proverbs deals very starkly in black and white, and Proverbs will often generalize things, but we understand there are obviously other factors. It might be education is a factor. You might not have very much education. That could hinder your ability, even as a hard worker, to, I submit to you, in this country, I don't know if that's going to be the case, even with little or no education, you can still, if you're willing to work, more often than not, in this country at least, you can at least get what you need. But that could be a limiting factor, right? What about opportunity for advancement? Sometimes there's just no opportunity for advancement provided. Well, that may be a limiting factor. What if you live in a communist government? Would that be a limiting factor? You better believe it. So it sometimes could come down to government. But again, Proverbs generalizes a lot, and it deals with stark black and whites. And that, certainly it is generally true. It is a truism. If you work hard, you're going to provide for your needs. And probably, more often than not, again, I think, if you're working hard, diligently, more than what you need. You'll even be able to save up some and have a little to spare. But, there are obviously some limiting factors for that. Anything else on that one? I guess I better not.
Chad?
Yes, sir.
Brother Jimmy was downstairs in the new converts class on Sunday talking about the work of the church and what the deacons do. And he made a statement about Blake. He said his job is a really, really hard job in the church. And having interacted with Blake with the benevolence, that is for sure. And we are very fortunate that we have someone like Blake that can study a situation. He's got some history, and I really do think he does the best job I've ever seen anybody do in the church on benevolence.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. And it's tough. And that kind of segues very nicely into the next two verses in the next chapter that we'll look at, but there's no way I'll get it in tonight. So we'll save that for next week because that's kind of what some of that deals with there in chapter 21 is when to help. And that's a struggle. That's a struggle for every church, even individuals. Like Joni mentioned, sometimes you just go into a restaurant, you're getting off the interstate, you're at an intersection in a big city, and here's somebody and they're asking for help. Do I help? Do I not? Sometimes it's just, gut-wrenching sometimes because we just don't know. And so Proverbs does deal some with that. It deals more with principles than anything as far as it deals more than anything with kind of saying don't be the one who is lazy and in that position. But even some on the other hand, we see some of those principles. Anything else on that?
I think you talked about when you left recently about the standard. We can work isn't to the Lord. And that's our standard. Laziness is a term that comes in degrees like faith and diligence. It's just not, there's extreme lazy, there's a little bit lazy, there's sometimes lazy. But all these things in Proverbs help us identify all those aspects. But we still have a standard. Are we working as if we're working for the Lord? And that's our goal.
Yeah, and I think there's always room for improvement, like we said last week. I used to think, sometimes I'd think to myself, well, I'm not a lazy person, and here comes my grandma at like 4:35 in the morning, like, get out of bed, we got work to do. Good night. So you're right, there are degrees of laziness and degrees of diligence. Tim, you were going to say something before we stop.
The Holy Spirit inspired Paul to write on this very topic in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, starting from verse 8. He says, neither did we eat any man's bread for naught, but worked and labored and toiled night and day, for that we might not be chargeable to any man, not because we did not have power, but to make ourselves examples unto you to follow us. For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any man would not work, neither should he eat. Now Paul said, I didn't eat your bread. I earned my own.
That's right.
To leave you an example.
Yep.
And he said, if a man will not work, have compassion and just get no, he says he doesn't eat. Now, how long do you survive if you're not eating?
And we all need help from time to time, but there's a difference in somebody who needs help, a worker who needs help temporarily versus somebody who just won't work. And yeah, you're right. Paul says if you won't work, you shouldn't eat. Thank y'all so much. We'll pick up there, Lord willing, next week.